Oh,
Sorry.
that's okay. That's okay. But let me blur my background in the meantime. Hide all my sins. There we go. Okay.
That's why interpreters have blue backgrounds. You just don't want to know what's behind there. You really don't.
I know it's washing, and actually it's all right. I don't really mind, but yeah, it's just a little bit more less distracting. It's just so much stuff for going on. But yeah, what else should I kind of prep you with, Anna? Um, I think on
Well,
the tech side of things, that's about, oh yeah, sorry, go on, yes.
will it be Anna who is sharing links and things? If
Yes.
we reference something, because I have two that I will be mentioning that aren't that might be difficult to find. So I'm just putting them in the chat so you have them easy to access.
Thank you.
Yeah,
So that is a video, and this is just a link to a book called Crip Negativity.
Oh,
There you go.
good. Thank you.
yeah, so you know when you want me to show this, to open this.
So it's just when I mention them, if you want to send a link so that the participants can save them for later or something.
Okay.
Yeah, if they're interested, it's like the further reading stuff.
Okay.
Because I'll be sharing the slides, I won't be able to do that at the same time, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember, Anna, if you click on the option to not show show non-video participants, turn that off.
Yeah.
Because when me and Dave swap over, and one of us will have our camera off.
Mm.
You'll just have a square with Dave's name in it. So if you show the non, it takes them off the screen, and then when he comes on, he'll be there, and then I'll go off. So at the moment, you can just see his name. So if you do the non-participants thing.
Yeah, I get it. Do you get it, Anna? Is that kind of clear?
Not really. Sorry.
Okay, so if you hover over your
you in the top right hand corner.
Yeah, I got that one because I did open that, and when I selected to hide,
That's the one.
That's all you have to do. That's all you have to do. That's a really important one. And once you do that, really everything else should fall into place. I also allowed you, Anna, the permission to multi-pin, which means you can pin lots of people at the same time so that they all show up in the recording. But if you don't pin, that's also kind of okay, because if you're hiding everyone who's not participating in the video anyway, you'll be recording just the people who are left with the videos on, so that's okay as well.
Yeah, basically to pin, I can see that on everybody's video, so I just select pin, and so you have allowed me to do that with everyone. I would need to. Yeah, I got that.
Whoever you want to pin, you
can. Sorry for this.
No, that's it's thank you for doing this. It's really helpful that I don't have to, because I could do it, but I would then be in multiple, head spaces. Makes it a little bit more makes it a bit more complicated. I guess one thing that Char mentioned earlier with the links, Anna, is in the conversation, sometimes people might just say certain interesting things, reference people, and if you're able to, you don't have to, but if you're able to maybe do a little Google search in the back, like maybe someone mentions an interesting Crip theorist, Mel Y. Chen last week was mentioned. So, Mel Y. Chen, maybe just like Google that and then put their name in it. Sometimes people might be, or the spelling could be a little bit confusing. So that sort of thing could be helpful for users and for participants. That's all. It's not like a must, but it's just helpful. And I'll try to do the same anyway, Anna. I did that quite a bit last week because some of the references were familiar to me. But if you chime in, that can be helpful.
Most of the ones that are mentioned in the slides are also referenced at the end of the slides, and the participants will have a link to that too. So yeah, don't stress about it because a lot of the information is there.
Yeah, fine. Anyway, I've been recording. So
That's okay. That's okay. I mean, like at the end, when we take the recording, we'll edit all the bits that we
Edit
don't
the
want
parts,
anyway.
okay.
The main thing is that we have the recording that we can edit down. So don't worry about, you know, recording too much. It's if we don't record that, yeah, might be the issue. Okay.
One for the-
Anything else anybody wants to flag up? We're good.
Was there anything different that you might want us to do based on your experiences last week working with interpreters, or was it all fine? Good, we'll crack on with
Yeah, like and both and it was Stacy's first go at it and she was quite nervous, but I think like just because of how well prepared Char and Jen are with the slides, especially, that it was, I think, very helpful for the interpreters to have that there to sign along, and with some of the terms there being clear afterwards, it was also, you know, people could just follow through with that. So I think it's, yeah, and the conversation just happens at like quite a regular pace as we had mentioned and talked about before. So hopefully it'll be okay. Yeah, so far we've got 6 people in the waiting room, so that's nice. But I won't really open it up until on the dot, I think. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I just have to think of a good somatic exercise. That's my thing that I haven't prepared enough on today. I just haven't had the headspace. But I'll just go with the flow. Okie doke. I think I'll just go ahead and let people in. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight to our harsh light session. We have a really special session tonight. And oh, just in case I hadn't written this in the email I sent out earlier with the link, so I apologize. But if you could just turn off your video and your audio to start with, we'll have some time during the session where we'll be inviting some discussion and maybe some of your thoughts, when you would be more than welcome to turn on your video and sound them. But for now, since we're trying to record it, we're gonna ask that you keep them off for now, please. I'll just give it another couple of minutes for people to filter in before we begin, perhaps. But yeah, thanks for coming. Okay, it's almost 7:05, so I think I'll just start. Hello, I'm Sunshine. I am the co-director of program at Block Projects, and this session tonight is one of our harsh light as part of our harsh light program. And yeah, I guess I'll start as I normally do with these sessions to introduce a little bit about harsh light, because I think actually most of our attendees probably will have come to previous harsh lights before, but just for those who are coming for the first time, yeah, we have been doing this online program for 3 years now, starting during the pandemic in 2020, when most of our programs were canceled. And this became a way for us to keep in touch with peers and friends and fellow art workers, all of whom were differently dealing with a very difficult time. And we just wanted to have this space to come together to discuss and work through questions of survival and flourishing as well in a very strange time. And of course, things have changed somewhat since then. We are continuing to live in a very sort of in these sort of poly crises of health, of war, of all of these different things. And we just feel that harsh light can be the space for us to kind of take a moment and to take stock and to kind of collectively listen and take care of each other. So something that we're trying out this year that's a little bit different from previous harsh lights is facilitation. So where up until these 2 sessions with Char and with Jennifer. Oh, I'm just having to let some people in. Sorry. Hang on. There we go. Yeah, up until the last session, we have been inviting people to come in and have conversations with each other and attendees and basically listen in and ask questions. Basically, it's more of a presentation and a talk kind of format. But we're trying out this facilitation idea to, I don't know, I think we all kind of need to be held more in these spaces, and I definitely feel like it's benefiting me as well to kind of take a step back from, you know, chairing and talking, to also make space for other things, something that's, you know, maybe a bit more restorative. So that's we've invited Char and Jennifer in last session and this session to try this format out. So we're really excited for that. And when we put out this invitation, it was kind of in early winter. We're now in midwinter, veering towards late winter. Yes. So our invitation was to do with the season, basically, to do with midwinter kind of harsh light. So last week we had a really wonderful session on mulching, which we will eventually put up on our website. I think it will be in the next couple of weeks. Just stay tuned on our social media and on our blockprojects.co.uk website. And today we are continuing this theme of renewal, of kind of these interruptions in our body, and that interruptions that are demanded by our body as well as by our environment, in today's session on Crip fragmentation. So before I hand it over to Char and to Jennifer, typically we try to do a little somatic grounding session in this online space and try and bring it to kind of like a more even temperature. So if you're up for doing this with us, then that would be fantastic. If not, then that's fine as well. You can just take a moment, a couple of moments for yourselves. But if you'd like to join in, then I invite you to do so. So I was thinking, because I had come in not very well prepared with this somatic exercise, that we would just take a few deep breaths and do a few stretches. Oh, sorry. I'm just having to let people in repeatedly. Excuse me. And so yes, so the deep breaths and the stretches. I think we should do 5 deep breaths in and out our noses, and for the stretching, maybe just tilting your head to the left and tilting your head to the right as you do that. And I think we should just do it in our own time. So I'm not going to like overly guide this, but yeah, in our own time, if you do 5 deep breaths in and 5 deep breaths out through your nose, and then do a few stretches with your neck to the left. And you can hold it there for 10 seconds, 15 seconds. A good stretch has to be, I've been told at least by a physiotherapist, has to be about 10 seconds long. So really give it some time to stretch. And then you can tilt to your right. Give it another 10 seconds. And then maybe even backwards, looking up towards the ceiling. We look down so much at our computers, at our phones. This actually is probably the most strenuous one for me. I wonder if it is for you as well. And just taking those deep breaths. And just give it a little, maybe just do a couple of small circles just to bring it back to the center. And one final deep breath. Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Char and Jennifer, but before I do so, I should probably also introduce people. So I'll just read their bios from our workshop description today. So Char Heather is a queer Crip writer, researcher, and workshop facilitator exploring the relationship between form, narrative, and chronic illness. Their work has appeared in Hotel, Spam, New Gothic Review, and Lighthouse Journal, amongst others. Char runs the Remote Body, a DIY organization that facilitates online arts events prioritizing chronically ill and disabled people, and is a member of Resting Up Collective. Jennifer Brough is a slow writer and workshop facilitator based in Nottingham, UK. She's working on her first poetry pamphlet, Occult Pain, which explores the body, pain, and gender through a magical disability justice lens. She's also the founding member of Resting Up Collective, an interdisciplinary Sikh group of artists that offers workshops on rest and creativity. So those are our facilitators tonight. I just remember that I also haven't done like some housekeeping, which I probably should do now quickly. As you can tell, we have BSL interpretation. So for our deaf audiences and our and interpreters, we take a quick 10-minute break in between. So our session is actually split into 2 halves of 40 minutes. So 40 minutes and then 10-minute break, which will take us to about 7:45 or so. We'll take a 10-minute break and then we'll come back again after that. Okay, so I'll hand it over to Char and to Jennifer.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having us, and thank you to everyone for being here. I'm gonna share my screen with some slides. I've seen in the chat that somebody might not have the visual aspect, but we'll be reading everything out that's on the slides as well. So it's there as a kind of extra space for absorbing information. So let me just share my screen. Ooh. Open that. Yes, that is up. Yeah, so today we're talking about this idea of Crip fragmentation. This is intended to be kind of a space to play and examine what these notions might mean to each of us individually. It's definitely not a kind of, here is the method, one size fits all kind of approach. So hopefully there'll be things in here that are useful to different people in different ways. I will skip past our lovely pictures and bios because we've been introduced. So as was just kind of mentioned, the workshop is going to be split into 2 parts, the break in the middle. Though if you need breaks at any time, of course, we encourage you to take them when you do. So each section is going to include some kind of discussion of ideas, some examination of the concepts that we're looking at. Followed by a kind of creative prompt, which is you can respond to by writing, or if you want to draw, or whatever kind of way you want to respond to those, you can. And they are kind of more suggestions for places to think. But if something else that we've discussed feels more kind of juicy to write in response to, feel free to kind of ignore the questions that we've asked on the slide and move in the direction of something that feels more fruitful for you. If that's the case, and then we will have a opportunity for people to kind of discuss and share, and I think that's the really exciting part of this format for me and for facilitation for me, is to be able to kind of hear from other people and kind of present ideas in this community, is that the right word, kind of way, this back and forth, where we can kind of move through and I'm always like surprised and excited by the things that participants bring to these spaces that are things that I just haven't thought about yet. So yeah, I hope to hear from some of you as we go along. So this is a quote from a book called, I always get the title confused in my mind, Crip Methodology. I think hopefully someone will put the correct title of the book in the chat. But this is from the introduction, where they say that there is a strand of theory that understands disability to be a creative force, a spur, a method of production. The mismatch between disabled body minds and built and social environments leads to particular Crip ways of thinking, being, representing, and making. And so this notion of Crip fragmentation is, for me at least, one of these kind of very particular ways that we might approach something that can kind of work with our body, with our sense of interruption, as opposed to against it. But I will talk more about that as we go. But that book generally is just so wonderful in terms of the different essays about kind of the Crip ways in which we make and create. I quote from it often because it's full of wonderful wisdom. So fragmentation has a very long history in different forms. My area of research and I hesitate to say expertise, but my area at least is in narrative and in literature. But this, I think, goes across other art forms as well. So in modernist traditions, fragments and fragmentation tended towards an idea of something that made a larger whole. So your fragments were like a mosaic or jigsaw pieces. There were these little kind of moments or little images that together created something that felt kind of what we would more traditionally kind of deem like coherent, or like narratively whole in some way. And then when we move into the postmodern traditions, then fragments kind of were used in a rather different way. And they were more as they kind of form to depict ideas or senses of disruption, interruption, and disintegration. So they were much less about this idea of a whole. They kind of went goodbye to the idea of something being a whole in itself and moved more towards kind of what can the fragment do? What kind of senses can it evoke in a formal way, in a thematic way? And so Crip fragmentation, I think for me definitely has echoes of postmodernist fragmentation, but to me it feels quite distinct. I think of it as something that might embrace these ideals or ideas of disruption and interruption in order for us to work with I've written the body, but I mean the body mind, as opposed to against it. And in that sense, also perhaps working then against particular conventions that might echo neoliberal capitalist expectations of the body. For me, I think Crip has like quite a lot of really wonderful meanings and interpretations, but I come back a lot to kind of a lot of Robert McCruer's writing on that Crip is something, to Crip something is to kind of work against neoliberal and capitalist expectations, alongside heteronormative expectations as well, often, of the body mind. So there's this sense of destabilizing convention that comes out through this. And I realize I've not been looking at my notes, so I will come back to them briefly. So here we're examining what we mean by Crip as a methodology, as something embracing interruption and disruption, but differing in some ways from the postmodern ideas. This links into our kind of lived experience of fragmentation, of interruption, which I think Crip or otherwise people have experienced a lot of interruption at some point in their lives, potentially even disintegration, and how we can reframe those experiences. And I think it's really important to note that reframing is very useful, but I want to avoid ideals of like kind of toxic positivity. Like if I reframe my chronic pain, I can see it as this really good positive thing. That's not what I'm trying to get at. I think, you know, if you're interrupted in whatever art practice or just whatever thing you're doing on a daily basis by chronic pain, the chronic pain is still painful. I don't want to put this kind of like overly positive, toxically positive spin on it. But I do think there are ways that we can maybe create practices that feel more in line with the things that we need, by perhaps, not for everybody, but perhaps by embracing this idea of fragmentation, and also seeing how that idea of fragmentation then can interact and commune with the form of the art that we're making. So for me, I'm a writer and currently writing a novel that very much plays with these ideas of my own experiences of kind of disruption and interruption. So it's told through fragments that don't necessarily give us a sense of this idea of a whole narrative, but gives us flashes of these moments that helps to depict something. And I think this comes up a lot in Crip making. So we have these different fragmented forms that are perhaps frustrating or resisting kind of narrative expectations or various expectations in different art forms, that potentially might have echoes of neoliberal capitalist expectations of the body and the mind. I was thinking through this earlier and realized that I hadn't put it in the slides, but it made me think a lot about Jamila Paras's new video, which is new film, sorry, which is called Spoons, after Carolyn Lazard. And in that, there's a soundtrack of different voice notes from different Crip artists communicating with each other. And the voice note feels, I guess different people use it differently, but for me, a lot of my kind of Crip friends and comrades communicate a lot through voice notes because we can listen when we're ready. And so it becomes these really beautiful conversations, but they're very fragmented. It might take, 3 weeks to get a 2-minute voice note back from someone, but the conversations themselves are really interesting and important and fruitful. And so you get a sense of that in Jamila Paras's video of the discussions being had, but also the form that they're taking. That feels, I don't think the film itself is necessarily making any form of comment on fragmentation, but it kind of comes through in the form and in the methodology itself of this making and discussing and connecting in a way that is fragmented, but that's not a fault. It's a kind of really beautiful way of pausing and sitting and waiting and resting and then coming back to something when you're ready. And of course, there's certain things in life that we can't necessarily do in that way. There is, I don't know, certain requirements, I guess, that we might have that might make interruption very difficult to embrace. But I think if we can use some of that in our art practice, there's some really exciting kind of formal innovations and comments to be made about the wider ways that we work. I think we live in a world that is very kind of anti-interruption in that sort of sense. We're told to kind of to keep calm and carry on and all of that nonsense. but being able to actually stop when we need to stop and take a break when we need to take a break and come back to something, though it can oftentimes be like frustrating. If it becomes kind of inbuilt, then I think there's some really I keep using the word fruitful, but some really fruitful things that can come from that, some exciting ideas that will blossom and can maybe explode from there. And there are other aspects of that we are going to discuss in more detail as we go on. But I'm quite excited as well about the idea of a kind of Crip fragmentation having this destabilizing quality, this idea of breaking things up into smaller pieces, and that might be the very groundwork on which we're kind of stood as a society or as an individual, and then think about how those pieces might be reconstructed, put together in different ways, to create a kind of different understanding, a different way of working with our bodies and with our minds and with our body minds. So what I can't see a clock currently, so I don't know how long I'm talking for. But I'm going to start with some prompts quite early on to see how these kind of ideas might already be presenting themselves to you. So the questions that I've put together here are: how have you experienced a sense of fragmentation? Have you experienced a sense of fragmentation? I had a really interesting conversation with somebody recently in which we're talking about this idea of illness is a narrative crisis and a moment where the self fractures. And the person I was talking to said, well, I don't feel like I'm a fractured person. I still feel like, I don't feel like my sense of self is fractured. I still feel whole. And then I started thinking about that for myself. And it's like, I just don't think I've ever thought of myself in terms of like whole or not whole. And this will be completely different for everybody. But I think it's an interesting way to think through it, and it's kind of how fragmentation to me has moved away from anything to do with sense of self, and it's moved way more towards kind of methodologies and form. So how might experience of fragmentation for you relate to time, relate to your body mind or other body minds, relate to relationships, and relate to society or societal expectations? So hopefully something in there will feel like a useful place to either write, doodle, draw in any way that feels good to you. And I think we have time for that to be about, we'll come back at, oh my gosh, maths, 7:33. That's about 6 minutes to make some notes on that, and we'll come back and have a bit of a chat. So I'll leave you to it, and I will write the time in the chat as to when we're coming back as well. And I'll stop sharing this. No, I'll keep sharing the screen because those prompts are useful to see. Okay, if you want to find a place to pause, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen. Been facilitating on Zoom for so long and still can't find the stop share button. But I was going to ask if anybody wanted to share, but I just want to take a moment to kind of respond and acknowledge to what Zayanda has said about cognitive fatigue, putting in a place where thoughts are fragmented, whilst kind of the contrast of anxiety producing this tangle. And that I was in the midst of writing a message and realized that we had to come back, that resonates with me quite a lot. And I think there's an interesting thing with the idea of the fragment that, for lack of better words, sounds kind of spiky. And that spikiness for me, I associate with anxiety. And this kind of buzziness, and then the kind of cognitive fatigue, which I also experience, has this both fragmentation, but also kind of this like blurred edges, almost like something's been like torn or smudged in a way and kind of layered. So, I mean, for me, I find kind of those visual descriptions really useful for kind of thinking through my own thoughts, which might not be the case for everybody. But yeah, thank you for sharing, Zayanda. And let's go to Angela.
Hi. Yeah, so I had this when you were talking at the beginning and you mentioned mosaic, I sort of took this metaphor really as a kind of my sense of fragmentation, that there are all these bits about me and my existence, so in time, in different times, at different places, that are all there, and they're all there somewhere. Some of them might have been covered up by other ones, but the white bit in between, the glue, if you will, the mortar perhaps between these kind of colorful fragments, that's me. That's kind of like my soul, if that's not too big a word. I like the idea that if I look at it, because I'm very not visual, more kind of hands-on person, if I look at it, I can only ever see like a real fragment of the whole thing, but perhaps my hands can see all of it. Perhaps my body can perceive all of it, you know, the bits that kind of like the dark side of the moon kind of things on the other side. Because I put this in the chat earlier, I trained to be a complementary therapist, or well, really alternative, but I like to call it complementary. And this idea of holistic is something I find really important for myself, and I use it for my own self-care. So, you know, the many bits that aren't cared for by healthcare or social care or those kind of official type care institutions, I try to fill them with my own kind of holistic thing. So the mosaic that sort of makes a whole, even if it is all fragments, but it is visible fragments. So we're not trying to make something fit. We're just adding things to it. I suppose it's like this big sort of mirror ball, maybe. Anyway, that was my my little visual metaphor there that I found quite pleasant.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. I think there was something in what you said about only being able to like focus on a little bit at a certain time as well. It was really nice. I've also just realized I plowed through that and didn't swap with Jennifer. I'm so sorry, Jennifer. My brain is very fragmented right now.
You said I don't want to fragment this presentation. I'm going to give you the narrative from start to finish.
So yeah, the reason Jennifer hasn't spoken is because I got overexcited and just plowed on. I'm very sorry. You will hear from Jennifer eventually, I promise. Let's go to Nico.
Hey. Yeah, I was also thinking about like this, like how like I guess Crip life is like also like often very unfragmented in a way. Like you can have like very like mundane and like repetitive like Crip life, and sometimes it's like you're looking for the thing to like fragment, like it's like something that you're desiring, like to like have a break from this like lying in bed day after day or doing these things to care for your body. And like, yeah, this, yeah, something also there, I think, like this, yeah, this like uninterrupted or like habitual like nature of Crip life, and that for me, like this fragmenting thing is something that I have like, yeah, kind of desired or looked for.
That's a really, sorry, Char, do you want to go ahead? No, I was just going to say, I think that's a really nice way of reframing what we think of as the center within these conversations about experiences, and especially neoliberal experiences, because in a world where so many of us are sick and becoming sick or disabled by the state or by where we live or by lack of care through any other interpersonal relation, I think reframing the absolute monotony of having to keep yourself going and care for yourself and care for others in a world that isn't very caring is indeed the boring part. Like, I really agree with what you're saying about trying to find the fragments of joy amongst that and making those things the special, like the fragmentary nature in which joy can happen, more of a focus. And I think Daya's got her hand up as well.
Yes, hello. I've done this exercise a million times because Char, I'm pretty sure every time you put on this workshop, I'm there. But today I was thinking very similarly to Angela about kind of time and memory and these versions of ourselves based on like our own experience, and then also kind of these versions of ourselves based on perhaps the labels that we give ourselves or that are kind of forced onto us with regards to societal expectations. And recently I've been thinking about time as kind of like not linear, but not spiral, but more like a stack of pancakes that you can kind of see a beginning, but also see all the parts at the same time. So that I just wanted to share because I thought if we're going with metaphors, I really liked the stack of pancakes, and every time I think about it, it makes me hungry. That's me, thanks.
I feel like that image of almost the stacked circles is probably some kind of like physician's description of time with, I don't know, I feel like there's probably something quite like sciencey, which is not an area in which I dwell, that perhaps there is something about that. Also, it's been what I term pancake day this week, so it feels very fitting as well. Would anybody else like to add anything in? I think there's something about the fragmentary nature of time, which is probably a whole 2-hour chat in itself in there. I don't think we've actually included a lot in the way of Crip time, which is rare for me and Jen. We normally like to talk about Crip time quite a lot.
I guess we can say that our methodology was Crip time in terms of putting things together. So
yeah, I mean, Jen and I work together quite a lot, and I feel like there is definitely an embracing of a fragmented approach that goes through. We do a lot of voice notes and here's an idea, let's come back to this idea in 6 months when we can actually think about it, and let's concentrate on this, but then maybe let's go over here for a bit and da 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 da. Sorry, talking very fast. Well, I think we're probably around time for a break. We're going to come back and talk about something that I think links a little bit with what Angela was saying about the pieces of the mosaic being held together by the self. And we're going to talk a little bit about the kind of connections with fragmentation. And I also just remembered from what Nico was saying that there's something really interesting that what you said made me think of in terms of especially when framing fragmentation as kind of a Crip existence thing, but looking at practice, the idea that maybe there's something problematic almost in the way that the fragments are like the work, when I actually do some work, and there is something almost, I don't want to say that this entire methodology is echoing neoliberal capitalist expectations of the body, but I wonder if there's an interesting kind of paradox in there, and maybe some of this thinking that is I mean, I like the gooey, knotty stuff that's hard to figure out and make sense of. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, because it's made me think a lot about kind of what those moments of kind of the fragment or the flash or whatever it is might be. But yeah, we're going to have a 10-minute break now, and then we're going to come back and talk about fragments and connections and all sorts of good stuff. If people want to start making their way back, we'll get started with our second part. I will share my screen. So enjoying kind of catching up with the chat. Yeah, there's some interesting things happening in the chat that I don't think I've got time to go into, but yeah, I appreciate it. So hopefully everyone is just about back. And so this is another quote from an essay in, I'm now looking at the book, it's called Crip, Authorship, Disability as Method. So Amy Hamray writes, Crip is not a synonym for disability, nor is it simply a political orientation. Rather, it is a specific commitment to shifting material arrangements. And so I wanted to think a little bit about this idea of kind of breakage. So breakage comes from, fragment, sorry, comes from a Latin word that means to break. And this is not to say that the methodology itself is broken as in faulty, but that perhaps it's something that we break into pieces necessarily, which to me is a distinctly Crip way of making, to create a practice that embraces breaks, pauses, and rests. And using breaks, pauses, and rest as methodology will often feed into the way that we make our art or write. And to me, fragmentation feels like a fairly organic form to work with when writing in such a way. And so I was thinking about how form, sorry, my notes are kind of down here, form might affect or be echoed in the form of making, and how fragmentation might reflect this idea of committing to shifting material arrangements. Does this kind of show up as a way where we're making this idea of a Crip fragmentation? This has come up again, like I was saying, in so many kind of Crip-made pieces of writing and art. And it makes me think a lot about a book by Mariam Michel called Supinely Sublimely. And so Mariam Michel is a visual artist who became very unwell and wasn't able to make art in a way that felt recognizable to them. And they started a blog in which they wrote what they termed textlings. So these very small little pieces of text for the moment that are very poetic and very beautiful. And this blog was eventually published as a very short book. And I think it kind of embodies this idea of a fragmented approach. It's very clear in the form, how it was written. It's these moments of being able to kind of think or discuss or just describe a moment in time, whilst kind of being committed to, well, kind of being forced in a way to kind of change the way that they approach their art making. And so this book was born from that. And it kind of zooms in on these small moments, which I find also a really interesting part of fragmentation, is this kind of zooming in and out of things, being able to focus. And this reflects, I think, ideas around Crip time, like focusing on a small moment for a very long time that kind of stretches that experience into something that might only have taken, you know, a few seconds to notice something, but kind of stretching it into something wider. And then other moments kind of get described as kind of an overarching, this happened, this happened, this happened. And that might have been, you know, 12 months. But then we have a lot of time given to this, you know, 3-second moment or whatever it is. And so I think there's an idea of this sense of breakage in the way that we might communicate certain ideas. Which feeds very much into one of my favorite quotes that anyone that's been to any workshop with me before on writing will probably have heard me read this. Is chronic illness is both writing and not writing, thinking and not thinking, being active and inactive. So it's this sense of stopping and starting, and those things they exist together at once. So fragmentation is not necessarily the only way of thinking through that, but to be able to embrace or acknowledge this idea that when we're not doing something, something might still be happening. And I think that links a lot into last week's workshop, if anybody was there, on pause being a really important part of any practice, that sometimes when everything's hidden in the damp and in the dark, things are still kind of going on and happening. Things are percolating or mulching, as we were talking about, composting. And so being able to have this acknowledgement, this embracing of the dark moments or the damp moments or the kind of pause, fallow, rest moments being really integral and not being a broken part of our methodology, but a break in our methodology that is key to the whole thing kind of working. I find very supporting to my own practice, because there is, you know, at the moment I'm writing a novel and I feel like I've spent probably the last 5 months like maybe writing once a week, and the rest of the time just sat there being vaguely maybe thinking about it or just doing something else entirely, which is quite anxiety inducing, especially because I have deadlines. But knowing that actually some of the most exciting things that happen in that process come from this resting moment. And that's not to say that all rest should be this kind of mulching of ideas. Sometimes rest should just be doing nothing and trying not to think about anything. But to know that for me, those pauses in practice are really essential to the practice itself is quite like a soothing kind of a balm for the, also like the irritation that obviously comes up when you're trying to do something, but you have to spend 3 weeks not doing that thing. I find it quite helpful to think through these ideas. And so now I want to, well, I'll be handing mostly over to Jen for this, but I wanted to talk about, and I think this has come up a bit, this idea of fragmentation not necessarily meaning unconnected or disconnected. And for me, interdependence is very much at the heart of so much Crip thinking and Crip work. And so I wonder if, which maybe feels a bit counterintuitive, that Crip fragmentation, maybe specifically as an orientation, as a way of thinking through things, centers these points, these moments of connection, almost like a kind of constellation of stars or a care web or a care network. And can we use fragments maybe to build other shapes? So for me, I think about narrative in different shapes, and I think about how a fragment can also exist in a shape that is plaiting. Jen actually has a wonderful short story that I think manages to do this thing. It meshes fragments with also ideas of like weaving, which as two shapes don't quite make sense together, but somehow the form kind of creates this meshing, this interlinking, these connections between fragments that for me feels both like something being woven or plaited together, but still maintaining this fragmented structure. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Jen.
Thanks, Char. So if we just go to the next slide, kind of building on themes from last week and the kind of mushroom networks that we spoke about, was thinking about how and if we should turn individual fragments into a wider narrative and what that says for collective narratives, especially coming from those centered in a disability or an illness experience. And one example here that is hyperlinked on the slides is called Translating Chronic Pain, Moments and Fragments, which is an interdisciplinary critical and creative project based at Lancaster University, led by Sarah Wasson, which exemplifies moving beyond narrative in literature. And I think this moving beyond is quite an interesting idea in this project. So the online anthology is currently open for submissions. I'm not sure if that's an indefinite thing, but the submissions required are those of flash illness writing, and they can be entries of up to 150 words that show a moment or fragment of experience of persistent pain. And I was kind of scrolling through this archive today and clicking on the function which is show me a random entry and making my own narrative thread whilst I was reading those. And it got me thinking about what placing these fragments in a wider anthology context does to individual strands, and thinking of what we spoke about last week of Leah Lakshmi Piatsana Samaransina's care webs, what that connectivity does as a reading experience, but also as a writing experience, if that is your particular craft, for example. Because I think with this project, the anthology doesn't necessarily reduce the impact or the weight of these singular strands, kind of, again, extending this weaving metaphor, but instead it represents a more universalized experience, going against the grain of a completed narrative arc, and shows the kind of kaleidoscopic nature of chronic pain experiences. And it got me thinking about how forms like an anthology or, you know, a discussion or a panel or any instance of which there are multiple voices speaking at once and speaking on the same ideas can act as sites of solidarity, which hopefully will leave the listener, the reader, less isolated in their experiences. Equally, I think the short form in this particular archive and the fragment as a wider whole lends itself to that snapshot in time, which is so useful for pinpointing experiences, but also resisting the need of completion or a full narrative. All of these pieces that are in this archive, 150 words is their final form. There isn't anything, you know, beyond that in terms of what's written, but it's more of a touchstone of these experiences. And I was thinking again about weaving and braiding and what that looks like. And a theorist called, this is referenced in the, what are they called? References, works cited slideshow at the bottom of the slides. But there's an author called Katie Weingarten who speaks of braiding theory, and she uses analytical tools to help account for my own illness experiences and those reported to me by others. And I was thinking about how many of us kind of, as Char was saying, practice theory and live this methodology when we entangle our lived experiences into our art making and creative practice. And Weingarten also analyzes narrative interdependence to bolster lived knowledge that may be otherwise incoherent or formless, or not necessarily something that is a standard narrative. And she uses family histories of illness as an example of this. So one not being able to happen without the other, but how we make references to it as a point of creativity and fun, I guess, and a narrative challenge in terms of how we're creating. And I think that whether we realize it or not, in moments like this workshop, in moments when we read these Crip sentences, these fragments, these experiences, they touch us in ways that speak to a wider web of care, of illness, of disability, of a kind of a wholeness, of community sense, which I think is, which can be missing from, you know, a lot of people if they're still shielding, if you're living a life where you're reliant on the care of others but don't see people often. And I think we're all working towards this wider web and it's waiting for us to connect to it. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. So on that note, we're going to go into some more writing prompts. And I'm just going to read them. So, how might your practice engage with intermittence and fragmentation? And what might that look like in the forms of creativity, art making, writing, or work you produce? Is it an ongoing commitment to pause as process? Is there a practical element to take from this? And how might this engage with your own politics or the politics of your art? And again, these are prompts and kind of seeds for growth in however way you'd like to tend to them or critique them in whatever way you desire. And we're on 8 minutes past 8 according to my clock, so we'll come back at 18 minutes past. Oh, it's just gone to 19 minutes past. And yeah, happy writing.
Yeah, if you want to find a place to pause and make your way back. Would anyone like to start us off with some thoughts, feelings that came out of that for you? Helen?
I'll start my yeah, I thought it was really interesting. I'm really enjoying everything. There's so many different thoughts that are going on. I thought one thing which I was thinking about was and I wrote down from the first sort of session as well, was the sort of extended time frame, and yeah, the work around sort of around being Crip, or the kind of pressures around that are put on that body, I suppose, to kind of be well, and the kind of processes around those kinds of kind of medicalized procedures. But then I was also thinking again about how this extended time frame is different for everyone, like that there is a sort of extended time frame that perhaps we're talking about, but actually that doesn't overlap, or it does overlap at certain points, but many times it doesn't overlap, and how to accommodate that within working together with other people. So I think that, and in the Crip authorship book, there's that question about there's that whole topic about waiting for others to catch up, or waiting, because I think the whole notion of catching up is problematic, but like waiting, or people waiting for you, you waiting for others to find the time, or to make, or to have the energy to work together. And that might mean that might take ages. It might mean that nothing might happen in that sense. But I think like you were saying, something is happening in that waiting process. It's like sort of giving a space for others' times, I suppose is what I'm saying. And I think yeah, and I'm not quite sure how I'm sort of negotiating that at the moment in a project that I'm working with, and how to not feel the pressure to chase, to and if it means that nobody can be available, it means that then nothing happens, but actually something's happening in that non-happening. You see what I mean? It's like really, and the pressures to yeah, to not do that are quite immense, actually. I think, yeah.
I think this is something that I don't know if you're thinking about this, Char, but we both work together in Resting Up Collective, and it's a kind of workspace with slowness inbuilt into its ethos and practice. And I fully understand the kind of challenges of there having to be some kind of ringleader, or some kind of task setter, or whatever that looks like. And I think one way that we've tried to accommodate that is through swapping roles after a time period, or we're going to trial that, because inevitably sometimes work, because of health circumstances or numerous other kind of factors, sometimes work ends up falling to the same people. And I think it's one of those kind of joys and eternal frustrations, I think, in any project, regardless of whether it's an activist space or not. And part of that ongoing challenge, especially when everyone is sick and Crip, is sometimes things don't get done. And you know, one of the ideas that we have many documents that we've started that are just half finished, and I think that in and of itself is a testament to what we're trying to do, but also the impossibility of that. And I think somewhere in the future, Char and I may try and found a museum of half-finished things. It's one of our many half-finished ideas, so I completely understand where you're coming from, Helen.
I think, yeah, that resonated with me a lot in terms of the pressure and anxiety of it as well, of like embracing pause, embracing rest, embracing this like slow fragmentary thing, but then also sat there being like, we haven't done anything in like 4 months. Should we be doing something? Which I think is somewhere that I hope this isn't a bad thing to say, but somewhere my brain's been with collective work recently is like, you know, but like, when are we going to do this, like, including myself, like, when can we do this thing or answer this email, and not, yeah, trying not to like really get too frustrated with it, but it's also so hard when I'm just so used to kind of like bashing things out. And even like saying this, I think I owe you an email at the moment, Helen, actually. Oh gosh, I do. No,
but I'm resisting that, and it's so inbuilt, it's so ingrained. Yeah, it's yeah, giving space, I think.
Yeah, it's I think there's such, like, Crip collaboration is my favorite thing in the world, and also, yeah, this unendingly like knotty thing where we're all kind of trying to negotiate like conflicting access needs and styles of work and things, which is like, yeah, I think Jem put it really well, being something that's like both eternally maybe like difficult, but also really like beautiful to be able to do. And when it works, it's like this gorgeous, amazing feeling. But it's peppered with moments of like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to approach this situation. Yeah, that resonated with me a lot. Thank you. Should we go to Angela?
So I struggled with this a little bit. It's sort of very theoretical, and I was thinking my biggest challenge. So my biggest physical problem is really fatigue, and my biggest challenge is resting. This pausing that you were talking about, and actually in God, how long have I not been able to work because of fatigue? That's probably 8 years. I'm still not resting. I still haven't found a way of integrating rest into my day, never mind my creative practice. And so I was thinking, actually, perhaps I should make a commitment. So I quite like the question about the commitment, because it's sort of meant that, hey, why don't I do that? That sounds good. Because it's because of my neurodiversity, neurodivergence, sorry, I find it very difficult to bridge from thinking something's a great idea and totally being behind it intellectually and theoretically and actually doing it. So I'm sure lots of people here would recognize that. And I realized when I was thinking about how can I do this kind of practical commitment of actually, you know, going and doing it. And some of the workshops, so we did this at the beginning tonight, and I sometimes go to other workshops where we do just, you know, just 5 breaths, just a minute of just sitting and just feeling how you're feeling, or I tend to sort of rock in my little chair, and that actually is like a fragment of rest. And that, I think, is really, really precious to me, because it's a lived experience where I know exactly when I do that, I find it much easier to write. It's much more like I'm less fatigued all over, but you know, if I do it at the beginning of writing, it really, really works. So watch this space. Maybe I will, next time I see you and we talk about this, I'll be able to say, I'm resting. Yay.
Yeah, I feel that so much. I mean, it feels so hypocritical to be someone that is constantly talking about rest, and yeah, I'm really quite bad at it. You know, today I should definitely have spent this afternoon resting, but because I was already out of the house and someone said, let's get lunch, I was like, oh my gosh, seeing a person, of course I must do it. And now I feel a bit buzzy and weird. But yeah, trying to, I think we talked about this last time as well, like what is rest? What are we counting as rest? And I think one of the reasons that I quite often like asking what kind of practical applications people might make to some of this thinking is kind of help. It's a call for help, because I really want to hear how other people are doing it, because it's interesting, but also because I am constantly trying to figure it out. And you know, sometimes I'll have 2 months of being really good at it, and sometimes I will look like currently I'm really not very. I say that I scheduled a whole rest day on Monday, which was nice, but yeah, sometimes find it really difficult to turn the brain off, I guess, without like absorbing something else, or you know, like watching something or whatever it is. I just want to read out what Sean's written in the chat as well, who said that I work with text collage a lot, and I've always been aware of some kind of link between both my methods of finished work with the fragmented way I experience speech and thought. But everything spoken about here has really given me new language to be able to describe it. There's a real element of pausing and having to commit to these pauses in order to build new work. I fill a jar with text fragments cut from old magazines and books, but it can keep filling the jar indefinitely, and I have to guide myself to pause and mosaic the scraps together. Oh, that's so beautiful. And such a wonderful way of working. Yeah, I think there's some really interesting links with ideas of collage. And was it, I can't remember if it was last week or not, but talking about no, I think it wasn't, it was something else. We were talking to Charlie Fitz about a film that they made that used a lot of, kind of was a collage film that had a narrative and a story, but used lots of artwork they'd made over the last decade to create this film, which perhaps I'm stretching a little bit to call that fragmentation, but that idea of taking things and then remaking them has, to me, like quite distinct Crip connotations, and when it's made by a Crip person anyway, because there isn't this like infinite amount of energy to make. You kind of, sometimes you have to go back through things that you've made before and like repurpose, which to me links to fragmentation or kind of mosaic and collage in a way, which might not resonate for others. But I really like that there's that, well, at least within Crip communities, there's like permission to be like, you don't have to constantly be making new things. You can take old things. And you know, I do a newsletter, and I wrote to a zine that published an essay last year because I didn't have the energy to write anything new, and was like, please, can I republish this in my newsletter? And they were like, of course. And then that was a nice moment of being able to kind of recycle, for lack of a better word, other material in different spaces to find different audiences and create new things.
I think before we wrap up on that point, Char, Jamila Prowse has another great piece of art that is a video of them reading out all of the apology emails that they've sent and like ripping them up. So saying, you know, these emails say things like, oh, I'm really sorry I'm delayed on this project, or I'm no longer able to contribute, and reading each email out and then just tearing it up. And that kind of collaging effect of something that is very inherently Crip and then dismantling it is quite a nice experience, I think.
I also just want to take a moment to acknowledge what Gretel's written, and the phrasing frantic stagnation, which I absolutely love. And also the term of like misrest as well is really, really great. Yeah, that's really wonderful. We're returning to the idea of rot, was it rot friends from last week? That was a beautiful term, friends that can rot together and fragment together and disintegrate together, perhaps. But yeah, thank you all so much. We're coming to the end now, so I'll hand back to Sunshine.
Hi. Oh, thank you so much for that. Definitely rot friends forever. RTT, is it? No, rot friends forever. RFF. Oh, that was a little bit of a dyslexia moment, wasn't it? Yeah. And I just actually wanted to end the night by learning some signs, because I feel like so much of what we've been discussing is like trying to get to this haptic nature, this sort of like dimension of pausing and of having to sit. And I feel like with the BSL interpreters that are in our peripheral vision have been, you know, signing this probably for us, and maybe we can also learn something from that. So I think that might be quite a nice thing to take away for the evening as we end the conversation. So Vicky, if I can borrow you, what is the sign for wait? Like this. And earlier I had fragmentation. That is another word for tonight, fragmentation. So there is sort of
different ways of signing it depending on what's been fragmented.
Ah, Okay. Yeah, because there is that slippage. I was thinking earlier about when Char and Jennifer were talking about describing it in a way like fragment versus fracture. You know, fracture is almost like a whole that then disintegrates, but fragments, you really, in my mind's eye, I do see these small bits that then come together, which I think really sort of plays out beautifully when you were talking about interdependence. So there, you know, to sort of individual fragments that come together, I guess. So can you do that sign again, Vicky? For fragmentation, you had fragmentation. Like that. So that's sort of a constellation to me as well, like kind of starry as well. And it's a bit of the movement's lovely. And then the last one, oh yeah, so two more, Vicky, interdependence and Crip.
So we've been finger spelling Crip because I'm not from that community, so I didn't feel it was appropriate for me to decide a sign.
So okay, I understand. There are different signs out there, but I think it would be better coming from a deaf person themselves.
Thank you.
Otherwise, it's kind of cultural appropriation of me taking the line for that, and it's not for me.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this is really, really great to take away. Yeah, I think that's basically it for tonight. Thank you so much. Thank you, Vicky, our interpreter. Thank you, Dave, as well. And Anna, if you don't mind putting on your camera as well. Anna has been in the background recording this for us tonight. And if you also, everybody else, want to turn on your camera just to say bye, then please feel free to do so. Otherwise, bye. Have a lovely rest of your evening, and hopefully we'll see you here again soon. Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Okay. Oh, Jen's gone again. She's forgotten again. It's okay.
I think maybe she missed the memo.
I know.
I just sent her a message to be like, stay, but obviously.
I know. It's okay. It's only a couple of minutes anyway, just to make sure that we don't have any concerns or things that we want to flag up, anything at all. How was it for you, Dave? Actually, that was your first time working with us.
Sorry, I'm still recording. Should I stop it? Or?
Oh, yeah, you can.
Okay, I'll stop it. Sorry. Sorry, Dave.